Hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webcast. My name is Andrew Barber. I'm a senior contributing editor, and I'll be acting as the moderator for today's presentation, which is sponsored by Tab Pilot Learning Systems. It's titled The Balancing Act, Bridging the Gap Between IT Concerns and Classroom Realities when Implementing Mobile Devices. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to take a few moments to highlight a couple of items. First, today's event will be recorded. In a couple of days, we'll send you an email that will contain a link to the recorded event, and you'll also be able to download a PDF of the presentation at that point. And second, please do ask questions. Don't feel as if you have to wait until the end. At any time during the presentation, if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A box on your console and hit the submit button. I hope to have 10 minutes or so at the end when our speakers can answer your questions. We also have a chat function, which can be launched via the brown group chat icon at the bottom of your screen. Use chat to talk among yourselves or to contact me or the eSchool News team with any technical issues or other concerns. However, please don't use the chat function to ask the panelists questions. They probably won't have time to monitor the chat. If you have a question, please use the Q&A panel instead. And one other point is if like me, you find it sometimes hard to read everything on the panels on the console, you can make them larger by clicking on the green icon in the top right-hand corner. So if you want to see the slides larger, and I believe we're going to have a screen share later on. If you want to see that in a larger format, just click on that green icon in the top right-hand corner of the panel, and it will expand. With that out of the way, let me take some time to welcome our three speakers. Tim Landek is Director of Technology Services for the Pajaro Valley Unified School District, overseeing all things technical for 20,000 students and 2,400 staff members. His department acts as a key bridge between the business services side of technology and the instructional side. And he makes extensive efforts to increase communication and understanding among technical and non-technical staff. Susan Brooks Young is a former teacher, site administrator, and technology integration specialist in both public and private education. Currently, she works with educators internationally, focusing on practical strategies for implementing technology in classrooms. Mobile technologies and BYOD programs are areas of particular interest for her. She has published hundreds of articles and a number of books on these topics. And although you don't see a photo of him up on the screen, we will also be hearing today from Jarrett Bolzer, who founded Tab Pilot Learning Systems in 2012 to meet the unique needs of the K-12 market for a mobile device management system. He is a computer science graduate of Berry College and has worked extensively in educational technology since 1993, starting with IBM's EduQuest educational division. Since then, he has started two other educational technology companies as well. Welcome to all of you. It's an honor to have you here today. Tim and Susan, why don't you get us started?
Okay, welcome. Tim, did you want to add anything to that great introduction that Andrew gave to you before we get started?
Well, thanks, Susan. Thanks, Andrew. That was a great introduction. I would add welcome to everybody, but I would also say I started in education as a teacher and started in the instructional side and spent 9 years in the classroom before I went into educational administration and technology leadership. So as I've come through various school districts and where I am now, I'm wrapping up 10 years in Pajaro Valley Unified. We have a large number of mobile devices here in the district, and we are always looking at ways to increase and improve collaboration and communication between our IT side and our instructional side. And so I'm very excited about all we have to share today.
And I'd like to add before we get started that one of the things that's really been very exciting for me as a consultant since I've gone out into the wide world has been getting opportunities to have conversations both with the ET side, which is ed tech, and the IT side, more the nuts and bolts of things. That was something I didn't get a chance to do much of when I was in the classroom or when I was an administrator. And what I've learned is just how critical it is to be able to have those kinds of conversations. So Tim and I have worked together over a number of years now doing exactly that sort of thing, and it's really a pleasure to have an opportunity to share what we've learned with all of you. Also, we'd like to have a little better sense of who has joined us today for this particular webcast. And so we'd like for you to take a moment now to look at the slide that I've just posted and go ahead and click next to the job title that most closely identifies your current role. If you have multiple roles, then go ahead and choose the one that is most like what it is you do. And if for some reason nothing there represents who you are, go ahead and click on other. But then in the group chat window, would you please type in what your job title is? So we'll give you just a minute to respond to that poll, and then we'll look at the results so that Tim and I have a better sense, as do all of you, as to who is here with us today. So I'm hoping that folks are clicking now, and I am seeing some additional positions being posted on the in the chat area. We've got a technology integration media specialist, IT director, ed tech specialist, and someone who supervises after school programs. That's really great to have you here. Sorry? I think we'll go ahead now and, I see some more things coming up here. Good, we've got some administrators here as well as people on the IT side. That's great. I'm going to switch to the next slide and see our results. I'm really pleased to see the number of people who identify themselves as being more on the ed tech side of education and technology. Often we end up in these particular kinds of webinars having really heavy attendance on the IT side, but it looks like we've got a pretty even spread across the board, maybe even a little bit heavier on ET, primarily based because many of the folks in the other categories seem to be coming up in ed tech as opposed to the IT side. That's great. I think that we've got a good group for a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. One more thing before we actually launch into the presentation is I would like to mention to you that Tim and I have created a list of resources that relate to what we're talking about today. These resources are going to be available to you following this webcast, so you'll be able to go back and access these and feel totally free to share this information with people back at your site and other colleagues who might be interested or with whom it might be appropriate to share this material. I believe that also Christine has been able to push that out for you so that you can click on the live link now if you'd like to peruse any of these resources while Tim and I are talking. And we'll share it with you one more time at the end, again, just to give you an opportunity to capture that URL if you don't get it now. So without further ado, Tim, why don't you go ahead and start us on the path that we're going to take this morning.
Okay, let's look at framing the conversation. I think it's really important when we're working with IT and ET together is looking at what are some of the shared challenges and establishing what is the common ground between these two departments, you could say these two sides, these two entities, but basically looking at what is it that we have in common, because finding that commonality is a key component to working together. You could look at a technology item, for example, and what is it that we want that to do? So how would the IT side look at that, and how would the instructional side look at that? Are we all both on the same page? We also can identify that we have shared challenges. I think everybody would see there's usually some funding challenges, maybe there's socioeconomic or political challenges, things that kind of bring us together to agree that we have real commonalities. And another component to look at is in kind of your evaluation of any kind of initiative, is it working? And what would it look like if it were to be working? And we could look at examples such as automation. For example, Susan and I were discussing the value of automation, and with IT, automation has a tremendous value. We look all the time at ways to make things happen automatically, such as we have a new student come into the school district, and they are starting on the 20th day of school. We already have our student accounts all created. If it's automatically set up so that account gets created automatically, we don't have to wait for a technician to set up an account in our Active Directory to make it so that they have login capabilities to their computer, maybe a shared drive, things of that sort. If that happens automatically, that's excellent, and that makes for much quicker resources available to students and teachers. But in some cases, automation isn't really looked upon so favorably in curriculum. Would you say that's true, Susan?
Absolutely. And this is something that I've run into before in conversations where IT and EdTech folks are together in the same room. Automation, as Tim described it, is really a positive and powerful tool, and something that you want to have on the back end to keep everything operating smoothly. But on the curriculum and instruction side, automation actually is something that we kind of tiptoe around and need to be careful with, because when you talk about automating activities in the classroom, typically what you're talking about are things like allowing kids to take quizzes online instead of using pencil and paper, perhaps even grading those quizzes using some kind of a back-end tool without the teacher having to sit and go through all of the responses. It might be being able to go to an online resource for doing research rather than having to go to a library media center and actually start pouring through print material. And while there's nothing wrong with students doing that kind of activity, there's a substantial body of research now that shows that if that's all you do with kids when they're using technology, in fact, they really are not doing a better job of learning the material that they need to master in order to move forward. So on the curriculum and instruction side, we want to ensure that automation is recognized for what it is, but that it isn't the end game. That isn't where you stop when you're trying to develop a program that's actually going to support kids. So it's really important, I think, that the IT side and the ET side clearly define what they mean by the term automation, which took us to that third bullet of common language. Did you want to add anything else, Tim, before we move into that a little bit more deeply?
Well, I think we're going to talk a little bit about security and having that common language and understanding what, for example, when you say the word security, what that means to IT and ET.
Absolutely.
Looking at that, yeah. So
let's go ahead and move on into that discussion. As I said on the previous slide, educators often use terms without having defined what it is they mean, and security is another one of those terms that frequently comes up with multiple definitions. When people on the instructional side are talking about security, their major concerns typically are including things like teachers having very limited administrative rights to install apps or other instructional materials. This is not looked at as being a positive when it comes to keeping the network up and running and secure. Some additional concerns from a teacher's perspective or an administrator's perspective is, how are we able to monitor what it is the students are doing? How are we able to ensure that they are, in fact, on task? Assessment becomes another issue. How is it that we're sure that we are able to protect the student data and make sure that only the people who need to have access to that are actually getting to it? And then, of course, digital citizenship is a huge issue, particularly with the use of social media and some of the other capabilities of mobile technologies that we're now dealing with. So these are the kinds of things that folks on the education side are thinking about when they talk about security. But Tim, that's not the same thing for you, is it?
Well, it's interesting because we do have some overlap, certainly, when you talk about student safeguards and, referencing digital citizenship. It's a big concern for IT. But when you talk about security with IT, we take it into a variety of areas, such as implementation, maintenance, and security of devices. So if I look at, say, system safeguards, for example, IT is very concerned about securing the network, securing servers, making sure the devices are secure, and then also the ability to upgrade and to automate certain items. So when the IT guy comes and says, hey, it's a security issue, it's easy for somebody in the classroom to kind of just go, oh, they just want to lock everything down. But really, frequently, it's a view of many different aspects of the implementation and the maintenance and support of a specific initiative or a device, something of that sort. But then we also do share, definitely in a big way, the student component, student safeguards. So looking at our web content filter, for example, and what we would block for out of inappropriate use versus items that we want to make sure are available for the classroom. So making sure our web content filter is up, is working, and is usable. Nobody wants to block everything, but at the same time, we want to make sure that items are blocked. It's better safe than sorry. We want to make sure that things are blocked to avoid any kind of issues that could arrive with that. So there are some issues around anonymity. So anonymous actions through applications such as Yik Yak or Burn Book, things of that sort, where IT doesn't necessarily have the ability to monitor anonymous actions. And that's something I think we're going to see coming up a little bit more over time with these apps or devices or websites even that provide anonymous access, meaning that you don't have to log in. There's no accountability for who says what or does what actions on the network. So I think it's really important that we understand that a word as simple as security can have many different meanings depending who's hearing it and who's saying it, and understanding that it's good to understand the full breadth of that word or of that process.
Thanks, Tim. So when you get the folks on the education side and the folks on the IT side together, then it's important that you've identified these challenges and that you have some open conversations about what's going on so that everybody's on the same page and everybody understands that, in fact, the bottom line is goes beyond network operability. It's really looking at what can we do to help students have the best possible learning environment and the best possible educational experiences. So what are some of the things that you can do to help strike that balance? I think that it's important for folks on the education side to bring the bulleted items that are here on this slide to the table for a full open discussion with the entire group that is working through planning or evaluating a mobile initiative. So you want to be sure that everybody has a shared vision, that everybody is on the same page when it comes to student performance being the real target or the real goal of what it is you're trying to accomplish. Set lofty goals. What would it look like in a perfect world, and how might you be able to attain that? A lot of times people get all caught up in what they can't do, and they end up limiting themselves, whereas if you've got education leaders and you've got the IT leaders together, you can come up with some really remarkable solutions that might not otherwise have been thought of. Teacher autonomy, I mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again. It's really important. Teachers need to feel that they've got control of their teaching environment, and so it's really important to figure out a way to make that be able to happen. One issue that I run into often in working with teachers is they have little or no access to the IT staff. And that needs to change, because when you can't get to the person, it really does underscore that perception that IT is disassociated from education, that they don't really understand what's going on, nor do they care. And that's really not the case, but these artificial boundaries often end up reinforcing that misunderstanding. A couple of other things that are important are reporting capabilities. What are teachers going to be able to do within the system that IT develops for them that will allow them to access critical information about student performance? And also just being able to set priorities. As educators, we often bite off way more than we can chew. And it's really important to say, this is what we'd like to do in a perfect world. This is what we're able to do right now. And then, Tim, I know that there's some other things that come from the IT side, too, that are very important.
Absolutely. Looking at IT challenges, I mentioned a little bit about safeguards of students and systems. I wanted to point out a little bit about the different styles of structures of IT departments in districts. And we've seen it go both ways, where we have an instructional technology department and a IT department or an information technology department. And that will have a different impact than if you have both IT and ET under the same wing, and who that person reports to as well. So having take a look at your own district, take a look at your own structure of the administration, and how the leader of the technology is positioned within that arena will have an impact on the ability, or I should say the ease of ability to communicate and collaborate with the instructional side. Something to keep in mind is that everybody has BYOD, even if you don't realize it. Bring your own device. We are faced with our networks. We lock down our networks, and we're faced with today students bringing their own network with them. So what students are bringing in their pocket and on their cell phones is a cellular network that IT does not have any guidance over. And so we have to keep in mind that, don't worry, we're addressing that issue because we're blocking that particular item. If a student has their own phone or their own device with their own cellular network, they're then creating their own network and can access all kinds of things that are not available on the district or the school network. Standards is a really important component that IT looks at a lot, and frequently people will say, well, how come we can't purchase this particular item, or why is it that you don't want to support this item in this place? It goes back to what I was saying before when I was talking security, which is implementation and support. If we can standardize on a specific, not necessarily just a platform, but also standardize on devices, then we're able to better support them down the road and make it so that they will actually work in the classroom. We look at processor speed and RAM, how much RAM a computer may have, hard disk size, and their network speed, the network card, what kind of a wireless access it has, and then do we have the personnel to support these devices? Do those personnel have the expertise to support it? And certainly, do we have the time to make this all happen? And the funding, is that in place as well? So it's kind of a full package when we look at one small device. Geez, why don't you let us have this one device? There's a lot more to it than just that device. There's so much more around supporting it and making it so it's accessible to the staff. There's no point in us saying, yes, we'll support it and not being able to, because then there's another level of frustration where people aren't able to access or utilize the device. So that's basically some big IT challenges for us.
And so it's important to point out that the topics that Tim and I have just covered tend to seldom be discussed by a group that includes people both from the instructional technology side and from the ET side. So what needs to happen in order to have a more successful implementation is to establish some kind of a group where you've got both sides represented, where you've got a positive tone and reasonable, clear goals have been established. And I think that one of the most important things to do is to come to an agreement that no major mobile initiatives will be implemented at your site or in your district without both groups working closely together. But it's a question, how do you make that happen? And Tim is going to give you some ideas about some best practices for getting these two groups to work together.
Absolutely. Some strategies for improvement or strategies to make all this work together. One is having your CTO, your Chief Technology Officer, at cabinet level and having them at the table with the leadership of a school district so that those decisions that are being made have a reference in technology. CETFA, the California Education Technology Professionals Association, and there's a link for that on the resource page, also has a CTO mentor program. So if your CTO comes from a business side, perhaps, and does not have some curricular background, that CTO mentor program is an option for somebody to learn about the full breadth of what it is to be CTO in an educational environment. We also want to make sure that there's a commitment on both sides to make the relationship work between instructional technology and information technology. So we, in our district, schedule directors meetings that help to bring people together, to collaborate, to discuss what projects are happening on various sides. We also, in our tech department, we also have staff that has instructional background. So when I was talking earlier about the blocking of websites, who decides that? What are the right websites to block? We subscribe to a service that blocks most of our websites, which is very important because we could in no way keep up with all of them. And it categorizes them and blocks them according to category. But there are some sites that should be opened up that might have been misblocked, or some sites that should be blocked that weren't. So who's making that decision? And that person should have some instructional background. We have teachers on special assignment in our district that help to bring that instructional background into the IT arena. They're doing professional development, but on top of that, they're at our staff meetings and helping to make sure that the classroom representation is happening. We also have a liaison network, and there's a link for that on the resource page. Our liaison network are teachers at all of our school sites. One teacher that we provide a stipend, they're a full-time teacher, to be kind of our conduit of communication between the IT department and the school site. And this is something to really help us to have an awareness of what's happening in the trenches, so to speak, get some feedback. If we're going to roll out an initiative, we do it through the liaison network, and they share it with their teachers and things of that sort. So having that kind of instructional component, a big part of your IT department, is really going to help greatly in increasing the communication and collaboration with the instructional side. And Susan, you believe that we're a lot more alike than we are different, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I think so, yes.
So with our facing of common barriers.
Yeah. So are you ready to move on to distributed administration as a solution?
Sure. Okay. This is a screenshot from Tab Pilot that you'll see a little bit more about soon. And I just wanted to emphasize a little bit about distributed administration. And one of the challenges that IT has is getting the resources out in a timely manner, in that we have a lot on our plates and limited resources to make it happen. And so when we go down the path of distributed administration, then we have the opportunity for teachers. If you look carefully at this slide, this is basically showing a little bit about control or rights that individual groups have to rolling out resources. And this one's divided up by teacher, school technician, school administrator, district administrator. And so there's certain rights that are handed to different levels of access for different levels of people within the organization. And so making it so that teachers can say, well, I want this app to be on this iPad at this time, or I want to have access to this particular website. And having that minutia control within the classroom is really important and an excellent tool, because if you're relying on the district administrator to manage that level, it's going to take a long time, and you're not going to get that just-in-time teaching. You're not going to get that access quick like that. So I just wanted to point out a little bit about distributed administration there.
And I'm glad you did, Tim. I think that something like this really opens up a lot of possibilities to address many of the concerns that both you and I talked about earlier in this webcast. And it seems like a really logical step to take or approach to take in helping IT and ET work more closely together. So what's really important in putting together a relationship that's going to work between IT and ET is to be prepared to plan early and avoid last-minute needs, to take the time to develop personal relationships between the IT staff and educators so that they understand that they all have the students' best interests at heart and really believe that. I think that one major thing to do is come to the agreement that nothing will be purchased or no contracts will be signed until there's been communication with both groups, because often that happens on both sides. And then there are issues around, well, this won't work, or we're not sure exactly how to make this happen. So just come to that agreement, and I think that you'll solve a lot of issues. If you don't take the time to include both sides, you're going to have more difficulty getting support overall for projects. So it really is important to get your stakeholders on board with a shared vision so that you can all move forward together. We're just about out of time for our part. I want to remind you just once more that there are online resources available to you. I forgot to point out that the top 3 resources are all around how do you get groups to come together and work together. And if that's not in your background, you may find that those links are helpful. And then here is contact information for Tim and for me. We'd be happy to hear from you if you had questions that were something that we could address for you. And at this point, I think it's time to hand things over to Jarrett.
Okay, thanks, Susan. I'm going to start up a little screen share here, so there may be just a moment while you guys are able to see the screen. Okay, you should start seeing some screen information pop in here. I'm looking at my monitor. I'm not seeing it quite yet. Here it comes on mine. And I'm going to give you a little look through TabPilot. And TabPilot is a mobile device management for Android and iOS platforms. And I'm actually going to start off. You can see both the iPad and the control tower, which is our cloud-based manager here. If you don't see it real well, remember to expand or maximize your window there. And I'm actually starting off on the screen where Tim left off when we were talking about the distributed administration, just to give you kind of another look here at where you can break things down by different roles within the school that would come out as part of that planning, where you decide ahead of time instead of after the fact whose responsibility is it to distribute apps, or who's allowed to search for apps, find them, how do they get distributed, who can have access to disable or enable certain features or functions on the mobile devices. So this lets you assign the roles to those functions. So you might look at the teacher column there and see certain things that are available just to teachers. And that also has the advantage in that teachers get a much neater, cleaner look at the system. So I'm going to switch to another web browser here. And you'll see this one I'm logged in as a teacher, and you'll see far fewer functions on the left menu. So this is typically what you might make available to teachers that's more on the classroom control side of the mobile device management. So you can see I came directly into a view and control panel here. And this lets them do things like clear passwords very quickly without coming back to the IT department when kids forget their password or their passcode, or maybe put them on a shared use device and you have to figure out how to get it off of there. Very quick to clear those. And if I drag my iPad onto the screen here, you'll be able to see just a little bit. So this allows you to assign things to teachers to be able to do things like lock the screen to get the students' attention at the front of the room. So if I click lock screen, you'll see my iPad should jump here and the whole screen heads up whatever type of message teachers want to make available to the students there. The home buttons become locked and students are unable to get out of that. And then they can be cleared one at a time or as a group. I'm going to release the whole group here. And you saw the little lock icon in the control tower, and then the student gets a message that says their screen's been unlocked and they can go back to work. Same is true for apps or websites. We have what we call the app lock. So we can choose an individual app, like I'm just going to choose this first one here, this algebra app. And it's going to automatically launch that on every device in the class. And you can see there my iPad is jumping into that. And you see the icons there, so the teacher can kind of keep a thumbnail view on which iPads have already gone into that app. And it would tell you if one of the iPads were missing the app, and it would still lock the device. So if you wanted kids on task, be it taking an online test or just a dedicated activity, you'd be able to do that. And again, these are all on the teacher side without having to have interaction from the IT department to turn things off or on here. And then we do the same thing with websites, and we call that the web lock. So I'll give you a quick look at that. There are actually two areas or two ways we can lock into students into a website. We can do just a single site, and the teacher can type one at the top here. It will be remembered for the next time, so if they're using maybe that same site throughout the course of a day with different classes, they don't have to keep retyping it. Or they can put in a more permanent list. We call them web links, and that's what you see down here at the bottom. So we could enable, say, Edmodo and Georgia Virtual School and Nearpod. And then when we hit web lock, the iPads are going to go directly into Safari. Now we have something similar on the Android side too. I just don't have that available right now on my screen share. But the way it works on the iPad is when I go to the allowed sites list, you can see that I have only those sites that I have enabled here. So we'll go ahead and free that up. Another neat function, and this ties a little bit into security too, is if you're using Apple TVs or you're using AirPlay, a couple of items. One is a teacher can come in here and select an individual student device to display their work to the class. And you can have a list of the Apple TV devices pre-configured in there. But we also have an answer to the question of how do you prevent students from connecting to those later, and that is that we only store the password in our system, and when the teacher exits the student device from broadcasting to the Apple TV, the password is no longer available on the device. So nobody needs to know the Apple TV passwords. It's all handled through the system there. So that's kind of a peek at what the IT side can give teachers control to on the teacher side. I'm going to flip back to the administrator's view here and just give you a quick peek at the types of things you'd expect from an MDM that you would really be more on the IT side, things like configuring your network profiles. So we can have the student networks with multiple Wi-Fi, all the different SSIDs if you have them configured here. The all-important global proxy, so if you have students taking devices home, that global proxy is locked in and will still force that web traffic through your web filter. And the certificates, of course, tie into that if you're filtering SSL. And this is also where the Apple TVs are configured. So this is where we can store the passwords in the system, and then they're not available to the students. So we arrange devices by device group. We've got full device inventory. This is available, again, for both iOS and Android. So if I look at my iPads, I can get details on the iPads. We clear activation lock, clear passcodes, the remote erase the device at the end of the year when they're turned back into the school. And we also have a level of access rights to all the devices and device groups. So again, teachers only have to see the ones that they are able to control, be it a grade level or a class or a cart full, that sort of thing. And then profiles are really the sets of restrictions that are available. And this is where IT can set up various restrictions and choose when teachers can activate those sets of restrictions. So you can have some classrooms that enable the camera and some that don't. So I've only got, looks like another minute or so left. So I do want to mention that we do offer this as a free trial to schools, both the iOS and the Android side. We'd love to have you guys try this out. There are a lot of details. We have some videos on our website. We do have different types of implementation scenarios. Teachers can set up classes if you're one-to-one, or you can manage everything by the group. We do have full app management on the IT side. Again, you decide who has rights to what areas. We support Apple VPP programs, so we can either look at our Apple VPP account and very quickly add an app to the system that way, or we can actually search the App Store directly from within TabPilot, and then we can add apps that way. And then it's just a simple matter of assigning apps to device groups to automatically distribute those apps. And that's one of the pretty powerful areas of TabPilot here. So I believe we have time for some Q&A.
Yes, well, Jarrett, thank you so much for the demonstration of TabPilot's capabilities in the MDM arena. And thank you again to Tim and Susan for sharing your insights on how school districts can bridge that gap between IT and the classroom when it comes to mobile devices as well. Jarrett, since you just were speaking most recently, why don't we stick with you for the couple of questions that have come in about that? And the first question is how can TabPilot handle a school that has a mix of one-to-one and shared use devices?
Well, that happens in the way you arrange the devices in the system. So by default, you can see I've got device groups set here. And those groups could represent grade levels if you're one-to-one, or something like Cart A, which would be for a shared use environment. But in particular with the one-to-one, that's where the classes feature comes into play, so that each teacher can have just the devices that are in the room at that time. So you can see I've got a handful of devices in this class. That way when I'm in the view and control and I'm doing things like locking or freezing screens, they're only going to happen for the devices that are in that class at that moment. The same is true for activating restrictions. If teachers are allowed to activate restrictions for after-school profile or something that turns cameras off and on, they can do it at the class level for the one-to-one or the group level, and both of them coexist in the same system. And the same is true actually for content too, where you can push files out to the devices and the web links that are available for the websites for student use.
Okay, great. And now, can TabPilot can it install apps on student iPads without prompting for an Apple ID password? And if so, how do you do that?
Yes, and that's actually really, that's been one of our common things. We've had schools say they've tried other systems and that doesn't always work real well. There are a couple of key components. Silent app installation needs to happen strictly through the volume purchase program. So when I go in here to my Apple VPP apps, it used to be that that only purchased apps were available. Now the free apps are also available through VPP. So even for those apps, once they get added through the Apple site to this list, then it's added just like any other app. So the key components are that it's Apple VPP apps only that will do the silent installation, and secondly, the devices have to be in supervised mode. And that can happen, devices can be supervised. All the DEP devices automatically end up supervised when they're enrolled in the system. So those two components have to go together for the silent installation. There is one new little tidbit there, and that is new to iOS 8.3. It was just, this is only a couple of weeks old. There is an option in the settings, and this isn't specific to our system. It's part of the Apple settings for not requiring a password for free apps. It will still pull it through the Apple ID and the App Store account that's configured on the iPad, but then those free apps, even if they're coming from App Store instead of VPP, those will install without prompting for the password. So we were pleased to see Apple introduce that feature.
Okay. Now, in the earlier question, you talked about one-to-one programs or shared device initiatives. What about if students are bringing their own devices? Can TabPilot work with student-owned devices that are being brought into the school environment?
It does. And on the iPad side, one of the things that's probably not going to happen with a student-owned device is the ability to put it into supervised mode. So there will be a limited number of features there, things that require supervised mode. Some of the features that were shown in the view and control, locking an iPad into a single app requires supervised mode. And this is true across the board. This is just the way Apple has set it up. There are certain things they allow through MDM providers that do require the supervised mode. So you have a lot of advantage on the school-owned devices, locking into a website, locking into an app, the screen freeze. There are a couple of other classroom feature side, but you still get basic MDM, pushing out of profiles, Apple TV passwords, basic device restrictions, and the app installation can happen even without supervised mode. So that would function on student-owned devices as well.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you for clarifying that. Why don't we switch back to Tim and Susan for a little bit. Susan, during the presentation, you talked about how important it was for the IT side and the classroom side not to go out and buy anything before everyone had come together. Let's look at something fundamental, is a situation where IT wants PCs, teachers want iPads. How do you even start that conversation?
Well, often I start that conversation with the chorus of IT folks and the teachers can be friends. And after we've gone through that a couple of times, we get serious and we start talking about, again, what is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to support student learning in the classroom and talk about the reasons why IT is making one recommendation versus the teachers making another recommendation, and just giving them an opportunity to explain why they think their device of choice is the best option for students in that particular setting. And often what I find is that IT staff are making recommendations based upon what's going to be best for the network, whereas teachers are making recommendations based upon ease of use in the classroom, but neither side really has a good understanding of why the other side is pushing what they want so hard. So if they can sit down and talk and they can lay everything out on the table, then it's easier to find common ground and it's easier to go ahead and come to an agreement about what's going to be best for kids in that setting. And what I'm also seeing a lot of now is schools, rather than going with one specific device, they're now coming around to the idea that one device does not fit all. And there are times when it's important to have a tablet. There are times when it's important to have a laptop or some other kind of device with a keyboard. And so maybe the solution is a mix of the two. But you can't come to that conclusion if you don't have the conversation.
If I may add here, I think Susan brings up a really good point about the conversation, beginning the conversation, and identifying that the instructional side is really looking at what the needs are in the classroom, and the IT side, she frames it as what works best for the network. I would expand that to say what works best for maintenance and supportability. I want to emphasize that neither side is wrong. Both those items are very important, and it's really critical that we realize that and acknowledge that, and that's going to help greatly in that communication, where both sides realize that maybe I don't understand exactly what the other side's looking at or why they want it that way, but it is important, and I need to understand that as best I can, and kind of entertain that in the conversation.
And one other thing, Tim, also is often IT staff is put in the position of making what's basically an instructional decision, and they don't always necessarily have the background to do that. So again, it's really important to have those conversations so that the decision is made with full information, not just one perspective or the other.
Absolutely.
Now, during the presentation, you referred to distributed administration as a tool for helping teachers get quick access to settings and applications for their students. Could you say a little bit more about why you think this is important for IT and ET and some of the benefits of that?
Sure. This just-in-time learning approach where a teacher realizes that they want to invest a little bit of time in the classroom about a specific item. If they can't gain access to the resources they need to do that in that moment, even with just a little planning to get there, then they're really shackled and they're at the mercy of IT, so to speak. But if in the classroom they're able to have access to rolling out specific resources, then their instructional plan can be greatly enhanced. And then on the other side with IT, if the IT department were to say, okay, everybody can do whatever they want and has access to do everything, well, you can imagine what the fallout would be from something like that. We would have non-functioning networks, we'd have non-functioning devices because people would be making some changes that wouldn't coincide with the overall plan, or would not necessarily allow the network to function or the devices to function. So the distributed administration takes that to another level where we are able to say, well, we can provide these rights, these abilities to be able to allow teachers or allow a school site administrator or a school site technician to make these changes, to have the rights to be able to make these adjustments to resources or how something's rolled out and such. But they wouldn't necessarily be adjusting larger things that are affecting other schools and that are affecting other areas. So distributed administration is basically granting rights to different levels of access for people to be able to adjust and administer a certain portion of, quote, the network or devices or initiatives. And I think that we are seeing distributed administration happening more and more because IT can't do it all and should not need to do it all. It really is a key component that we want to give that ability for the classroom, the teacher who knows the instruction, who knows what the curriculum is and what they're trying to achieve, have that kind of rights to be able to make those changes. So it's a challenging thing, and Tab Pilot's done a nice job of it here. It is a challenging thing for software manufacturers to pull off because you then have to really delineate the difference, who has rights to what, and why would they have those particular rights. But I think that we're seeing more and more of that coming down the pike from different vendors, and we'll see it more in school districts.
Well, and I'd like to add, I think, too, that distributed administration is an opportunity to give everybody appropriate autonomy, and just having that sense of a little bit more control of your environment goes a long, long way to forging stronger relationships.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Why don't we come back to Jared quickly? Jared, one of the issues that many schools face, obviously, is when the devices go home, there's a huge difference in the kind of access, if any, that students might have with their devices at home. Does this have any impact on how Tab Pilot works, and how does it cope with that?
Well, there are a lot of different models for what schools want the students to have access at home, and we try to accommodate as much of that as possible. One thing that we do is profiles that have certain types of restrictions are all schedulable. So we've had schools say, you know what, we just want an after-school profile or a weekend profile, and we really see it on opposites. In some cases, they don't have the ability to filter at home, and they actually want all web access blocked at home. They just want ebooks. They're things that are local to the device, and we've worked with schools doing that. We've also had the opposite. We've had schools where we've had teachers say, you know what, I don't want the distraction. They can't browse the web freely in my room, but when they go home, they want to open up a lot more things for the students to do. They allow them on just about anything in terms of apps and Facebook and Instagram, you know, the more fun things. They don't want them resenting and hating the devices as a books-only kind of device. So things like schedulable profiles help with that. Things like the ability to enforce a global proxy so that if you can bring it back through your filter, you can then allow access and know that you're still within compliance when the devices go home. And some of that ties into the digital citizenship. Is do they want some schools allow students and teach them the aspects of finding, evaluating, and installing the best apps and giving them that freedom. Others keep things a little bit more locked down, or maybe they're not ready, or maybe it's age-based. So they can do it on device group based on age to decide who has those types of restrictions. And the types of capabilities that we have and the levels of lockdown vary a little bit between the iOS and the Android platform, and we try to accommodate as many of those as we can. But scheduled profiles is a big part of that.
Okay. And now, we have had some discussion in the Q&A about iPads and PCs. Can you talk a little bit about, Chromebooks? Is Tab Pilot something that can work with Chromebooks? And if so, what's the situation there?
We don't currently work with Chromebooks. We're kind of evaluating what is open through Google's APIs that actually allow us to do. Right now, there are a few things that there are some capabilities for, but most of them still require that all the devices already be registered with the Google Management Console. And we're not the only MDM developer that's trying to, I guess you could say, convince Google that a little bit more openness there, could allow a little more flexibility for MDM vendors that are providing capabilities for other platforms to be able to seamlessly integrate the Chrome management without having to have dual platforms side by side. So that's something we still need to look at down the road, but we don't have capabilities for right now.
Okay. Right, thanks for clarifying that. Tim and Susan, we probably have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask you one that sort of cuts to the heart of everything is the strategies for encouraging IT staff to get a better understanding of classroom needs beyond hardware and equipment. Do you have some solid strategies and proven strategies that you can share with the audience about what works in achieving that? Tim, I suppose that would really maybe go to you.
So I think what Susan was talking about before about just opening the communication is a key component to a lot of it. Making sure that you're having that, as I mentioned earlier, having the instructional component within the IT department so that you're not just boxes and wires in IT. Making sure that the IT personnel understands that we're in a school district and our main goal is student achievement. That's really why we're here. And then we step back from it and we can very easily find ourselves in the midst of boxes and wires. But making sure that your staff understands that. There's a couple resources that I included on the resource page, some books and such that really expose staff to that kind of idea, the Fred Factor by Mark Sanborn and things of that sort. So I encourage you to look at those resources as well. They have some great resources to share with staff for that attitude.
Okay. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our hour. If we didn't get to your questions, one of today's speakers will follow up with you directly to get you some answers. And as we wrap up, I want to thank Tim Landek, Susan Brooks-Young, and Jared Volter for their excellent presentations. I'd also like to thank Tab Pilot Learning Systems for its support. And I want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us today. And one final reminder, we will be sending out that email to everyone who attended when the recording of the webinar is ready. So thank you, and this concludes today's webcast. Goodbye.